My daughter called me on a Tuesday evening in October, right when I was taking the roast out of the oven. I remember that detail because I set it down too hard on the stovetop and burned my wrist on the rack. And then I couldn't even react to the pain because of what she said next. Mum, I have to tell you something. I'm getting married this Saturday, and I need you to know I've already taken care of the money. I didn't understand at first. I asked her what she meant by taken care of. She said I transferred the money from your joint account, the one Dad left you. I knew you'd say no if I asked, so I didn't ask. The venue is booked, it's done. I stood there in my kitchen in Barry, holding a dish towel, and I felt absolutely nothing for about 10 seconds. Just nothing, like my brain had disconnected from the rest of me. Then I checked my account on my phone right there at the counter. $64,000 gone. I want to be honest with you. I'm 63 years old. I'm a retired dental hygienist. I worked for 31 years. I raised two children mostly alone after my husband Harold passed, and that money was not just savings. It was the last thing Harold and I had built together before the cancer took him. We had put it aside carefully over years for emergencies, for the future. The account was joint because Harold had added my daughter to it when he got sick. He wanted her to be able to help me if something happened. That was the level of trust Harold had in her. And she had used that trust to drain it. The wedding was on Saturday. It was Wednesday evening. I had 3 days. I won't pretend I handled it gracefully. I sat down on the kitchen floor, right there on the tile, and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since Harold's funeral. Not because of the money, or not only because of the money, but because I thought I knew my daughter. I thought I knew who she was. Her name is Corinne. She was 31 that October. She works in marketing, drives a nice car, wears expensive clothes. She met her fiancé, a man named Spencer, about 2 years before all of this. Spencer came from what I can only describe as a comfortable family. His parents have a large home in Oakville. His mother collects art. His father plays golf 4 times a week. They are the kind of people who talk about their cottage the way other people talk about a second bedroom. From the beginning, I felt something I couldn't name when I was around Spencer. Not dislike exactly, more like the awareness that he saw my daughter as someone to be upgraded. And I noticed that Corinne, when she was with him, started talking differently, started apologizing for things she never used to apologize for, started referring to our home, the bungalow in Barry where she grew up, as modest, like it was something to distance herself from. But she was my daughter. I told myself I was being unfair. After I got off the floor that night, I called her back. She picked up on the second ring, which surprised me. I had expected her to avoid me. Mom, before you say anything. Corinne. That's all I said, just her name. She was quiet for a moment. Spencer's parents said they'd cover the reception costs, that then his dad had some investment issue and they couldn't anymore, and the deposit was already paid and the date was set, and I panicked. And I knew you had the money, and I knew you'd want me to be happy. And you transferred $64,000 out of my account without asking me. I was going to pay you back. When? Silence. Corinne, that money was set aside for my retirement. You know that. You know why Harold added you to that account. It wasn't a gift. Mum, I'm getting married in 4 days. Can we please just? I'll talk to you after the wedding. I hung up. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark in the house Harold and I had lived in for 26 years, and I thought about what kind of mother I had been, whether I had made her this way, whether I had loved her so hard that I had failed to teach her what love actually requires of a person. I also thought about practical things, what my options were. In the morning, I called a lawyer. I know that sounds fast and cold, but I want to explain something. I had been a dental hygienist. I had spent my entire career working inside people's mouths, listening to them talk about their lives in the minutes before and after the chair, and I had learned something very specific about human nature. The people who cause you the worst pain are often not strangers. They are the people you trusted the most. And trust, once broken that way, does not repair itself with an apology. It requires something more. The lawyer, a woman named Patricia, who worked out of an office on Dunlop Street, was calm and direct. She told me that because Corinne had been listed on the account, the transfer was technically legal. However, she said, the nature of the account, established as a support mechanism for me after Harold's death, not as a shared asset, and the lack of any consent from me could form the basis of a civil claim. She said I should not, under any circumstances, attend that wedding or give any appearance of approval. I told her I had no intention of attending. She also said something I wasn't expecting. She asked me whether Corinne had any access to any other accounts, any property documents, anything else in my name. I told her no. But that night, I went through every piece of paper in Harold's old filing cabinet in the basement, just to be sure. I changed passwords. I called my bank. I flagged the situation. I felt like a person who had discovered a leak in the foundation of their house and had to check every wall for damage. The wedding happened on Saturday. I stayed home. I made tea. I watched a nature documentary about the coast of Newfoundland. I remember a segment about puffins and thinking how extraordinarily unbothered they looked, standing on a rock in the North Atlantic, completely indifferent to the wind. I thought about Harold. I thought about how he would have handled this. He was a quieter man than me, steadier. He would not have panicked. He would have said, "Let's wait and see what she does next." He always believed people showed you who they were in the follow-through. Monday morning, I got a text from Corinne. It said, "I hope you know you ruined my wedding by not coming. Spencer's family asked about you, and I had to lie. I hope you're happy." I read it twice. Then I put the phone down and went and watered my plants. I did not respond. What I didn't tell Corinne, what I hadn't told anyone yet, was what I had discovered in Harold's filing cabinet the night I went looking. Harold had updated his will 8 months before he died. There was a provision I had genuinely forgotten about, or perhaps had put out of my mind in the grief of those first years. The house, our bungalow in Barry, the one I had lived in for over 2 decades, was not jointly owned in the way Corinne assumed. Harold had put it in a family trust. The trust had very specific terms. I was the primary beneficiary. Corinne was listed as a secondary beneficiary only under specific conditions, one of which was that I had predeceased her, and another of which was that I had not been the subject of any financial harm caused by the beneficiary. That second clause. Harold had added that second clause. I hadn't known why at the time, but sitting on the basement floor with the document in my hands that night, I understood. Harold had known something about his daughter that I had refused to see. He had loved her completely, and he had still added that clause. I sat with that for a long time. Patricia reviewed the trust document the following week. She confirmed that Corinne's action, the unauthorized transfer, very likely triggered that exclusionary clause, depending on how the trustee interpreted it. The trustee was Harold's brother, a quiet man named Douglas, who lived in Kingston and had been a high school principal for 30 years. Patricia said she would reach out to him. I want to stop here and tell you something about Douglas, because he matters to this story. Harold and Douglas were close in the way that brothers can be who have been through difficulty together. Their father had been a hard man. Douglas was the one who called me the morning Harold died, before I had even left the hospital. He drove 4 hours to be at the funeral. He sat with me in the kitchen that whole first week and didn't say very much, just drank tea and kept me company. And then he drove back to Kingston and called me every Sunday for 3 years afterward. When Patricia reached out to him about the trust, he called me directly. "I heard," he said. "I'm sorry, Loretta." That was the first time I had cried. since the night it happened. Just hearing him say my name like that. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which was very Douglas. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, Harold always worried about her. Not that she was bad, just that she'd find someone who'd point her in the wrong direction. I asked him what he wanted to do. He said, I want to do what Harold set up the trust to do, protect you. The weeks after that were not dramatic. They were mostly paperwork and phone calls and meetings with Patricia, and one long, difficult conversation with Douglas about what enforcing the terms would actually mean for Corinne in the long run. We weren't trying to destroy her, but we were not going to pretend nothing had happened. Corinne found out about the trust and her potential exclusion from it 6 weeks after her wedding. I don't know exactly how. I think Spencer's father, who apparently had some legal connections, looked into my assets at some point, which was its own kind of disturbing. What I know is that on a Thursday evening in December, my doorbell rang, and I opened the door to find Corinne standing on my porch in the cold without a coat. Her face looked different. Not older exactly, more like something had been removed from it. "Mom," she said. I stepped back and let her in. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table she had sat at for homework and birthday dinners, and every argument we'd ever had. And she told me that she and Spencer had been fighting, that his parents had already begun making comments about her background, her family, the fact that her mother was a retired dental hygienist from Barry and not, and I'm quoting Spencer's mother here, as Corinne reported it, the kind of people Spencer usually moves in. That Spencer had said things in those first weeks of marriage that had frightened her. Not physically, just, she said she felt like she was disappearing inside his idea of who she should be. I listened to all of this. I didn't say anything until she was done. Then I said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Did Spencer know you were going to take that money before you did it? She looked at the table. Corinne. Corinne. He suggested it, she said quietly. He said it was technically my money to access. He said you'd forgive me. I felt something then that I don't quite have a word for. It wasn't satisfaction. It was more like a door closing, something settling into place. He was wrong, I said, on both counts. She started to cry. And I want to be clear, I did not comfort her right away. I think that sounds cold. But I had spent 2 months managing my own pain very quietly, and I needed her to understand that it was real, that she had caused it, that apologies by themselves were not the currency this situation required. After a while, I got up and made tea. That's what you do in this family, you make tea. I sat back down and I said, I'm not going to pretend I'm not angry. I am. And the legal situation, what Harold set up, that's not up to me to undo. That's Douglas's decision as trustee, and you'll need to speak with him. But I want to know what you're going to do now. Not about the money, about your life. She told me she was thinking about leaving Spencer, that things had moved fast and she had made choices she didn't recognize anymore. I asked if she was safe. She said yes, just unhappy. We talked for 3 hours that night. Not about the money mostly. About Harold. About the years after he died. About how Corinne had been 17 when he got sick and 20 when he died, and how I had probably been too lost in my own grief to see how much she had been carrying. About the way she had met Spencer at a point in her life when she was still figuring out who she was without her father, and how easy it must have been to let someone else's certainty fill in the gap. I'm not explaining this to excuse her. I'm explaining it because it's true, and because understanding something is not the same as forgiving it. She left around 11. I stood in the doorway and watched her car pull out of the driveway in the cold December air, the exhaust white against the dark, and I thought about Harold again, about the trust he had built, the clause he had added, the quiet, careful way he had loved us both, even knowing what he knew. The civil claim was settled the following spring. Corinne returned $47,000, the amount Patricia determined was recoverable given legal costs and the nature of the account. The remaining $17,000 was gone, spent on a venue and a florist and a photographer for a marriage that lasted less than a year. Spencer and Corinne separated the following August. I found out from Corinne herself in a phone call that lasted about 4 minutes because she was trying very hard to sound like she was fine. She wasn't fine, but she would be. I knew that the way you know things about your own children, in the place past reason. Douglas reviewed the trust and after considerable deliberation determined that Corinne's repayment and demonstrated remorse were sufficient grounds to maintain her as a secondary beneficiary, with an amendment that Harold, I think, would have approved of. Any future claim she had on the estate would be contingent on a relationship of demonstrated good faith with me. His words, not mine. When he told me about the amendment, I asked him if he thought Harold would have done the same. Douglas was quiet for a moment. Then he said Harold never stopped believing she'd come around. He just didn't want her to come around at your expense. I'm telling you this story not because I want you to feel sorry for me. I don't. I'm 63 years old. I have my health, my home, my garden, my Sunday calls with Douglas. I have a daughter who is, slowly and painfully and imperfectly, learning something important about who she is. But I am telling you this because I think about all the women I know, women my age and older, who have quietly let things slide, who have told themselves it was complicated, who have absorbed the cost of someone else's choices and called it love. Harold taught me that real love has a structure, it has a foundation. It can be generous and still have walls. Make a will, know what's in it. Know who has access to what and why. Don't wait for a Tuesday evening phone call to find out. I burned my wrist that night on the oven rack. The mark faded by December, but I still notice it sometimes when the light is right. A faint line just above the wrist bone. I don't mind it. It reminds me that I felt the pain and stood up anyway. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a house after something like this. Not peace exactly, more like the silence after a door closes, the kind you know won't open the same way again. I think about the choices Corinne made, and I don't think she was a cruel person who set out to hurt me. I think she was someone who had slowly, over 2 years, let someone else's voice become louder than her own conscience. Spencer didn't force her hand, but he showed her a door, and she walked through it. That's the part she'll have to sit with for a long time. Not that she was manipulated, but that she chose to let herself be. There's a difference, and it matters. What strikes me now, looking back, is how much of this could have unraveled differently at almost any point if I hadn't gone through Harold's filing cabinet that night. If Douglas had been a different kind of man, if I had let the guilt of being difficult stop me from calling Patricia in the morning. The outcome of our lives so often hinges on whether we're willing to do the uncomfortable thing at the uncomfortable moment, not the heroic thing, not the dramatic thing, just the steady, clear-eyed thing. That's not something that comes naturally. It's something you build over years out of smaller choices that nobody applauds. Harold built that in me, I think. He was not a complicated man, but he was a careful one. He thought things through. He asked questions before he trusted, and he loved us both, Corinne and me, with enough clarity to know that love without structure is just sentiment. The trust, the clause, the thought he put into that document when he was sick and exhausted and still thinking about what would happen to me after he was gone, that was not coldness. That was the deepest kind of care. He used his mind when his heart was breaking. I've had people ask me, since all of this, whether I felt any satisfaction when Corinne found out about the trust. I understand why they ask. But no, what I felt was more like grief. Grief that it had come to that. Grief that Harold had been right to worry. Grief that my daughter had needed a legal document to stop her from making her worst self permanent. What I did feel, genuinely, was a kind of resolve, the resolve to not collapse, to not let the loss of $64,000 or the loss of a version of my daughter I had believed in take me down. I had buried Harold. I had raised two children, mostly alone. I had worked 31 years with my hands in other people's mouths, earning every dollar in that account. I was not going to sit down and let this be the thing that finished me. That's the part I want to leave with you. Not the legal strategy, not the trust document, not even Harold's foresight, though all of it mattered. What carried me through was something simpler and harder than any of that. It was knowing what I stood for, being willing to think clearly instead of just reacting, and refusing to give up on my own life because someone else had treated it carelessly. Corinne is finding her way back, slowly, imperfectly, and not rushing it. Some things take as long as they take.